Warm welcome back to my channel, everybody that's been following along lately with the podcast. Thank you all for the feedback, the likes, comments, all the subscribes. I'm almost to 1,000 subscriptions, which is wonderful. And I just wanted to put out a big thank you to those of you that have reached out to me, emailed me, even those of you that have done typing sessions. That's all been helping me lately to kind of refine these definitions of the types and keep learning more about them. So big thank you to all of you that have reached out and done that. Today we're going to take a little bit of a break from all the podcasts. I think it's important to get out this message to compare and contrast all the 24 attitudinal types. So this kind of helps people differentiate what type they might be, or maybe they're confused between two different types, and certainly we're not going to go over every single combination, but I just want to put out the basics of what each type looks like in comparison to the other types. So this video might look like the one I did 2 years ago, where I kind of just went over the each type individually, but you will also see some changes that have been made and some differences now in thinking and what's kind of been uncovered the more that I've talked to each type and figured out what's going on in there. So without further ado, let's start with the types. You will see these organized on your screen since this is in podcast format, and just go ahead and click on whichever type you want to look at if that's so. But I do highly recommend to listen through this entire podcast, because you will see your type might be mentioned and other types similar. So for those of you who are trying to get a fully rounded understanding of all the types, go ahead and listen to all of this, as it will be highly informative and educational. So first type we're going to start with is our FVLE, known as the Patron. And this type, as most of you know, is probably the most helpful type out of all AP types when it comes to behavior. However, that doesn't mean that all of them are all sunshines and rainbows. There are kind of darker, meaner, careless FVLEs. You're not instantly a good person by default, or a happy, sunshiny person, just because you're FVLE. So that's the first point. The second point, this type is going to be more of an adventurer than any of the other high V, high F types. So compared to FVEL, for instance, this type is going to be more willing to not plan ahead. So they're more open to multiple possibilities. They have less of an emotional insecurity like the FVEL. They aren't as offended by people. They're more offended by logic and people that are wrong or have bad opinions in their own mind. If they think that person has a bad opinion, that person could be entirely correct, but if the FVLE doesn't like what that person believes, then they're more willing to move on. Now, I will also say FVLEs have a weird 3L, and what I mean by that is it might not always be apparent that they're 3L. A lot of them won't argue with you, or they won't push back against people that they think are know-it-alls or 1Ls. Sometimes they just disappear. They also won't share their logic as easily as the other 3L types. Now, in general, that's something that 3Ls don't like to do unless they feel that they're correct. But a lot of 3Ls, pretty much all the other 3Ls, they will push back when they believe that somebody else is being wrong or inconsistent or too assured of their opinion. It can start to look like Enneagram 6. Some of them are Enneagram 6s, but even if they're not 6s, it's kind of where everybody connects to 6, is through that third attitude. So for the 3L of FVLE, it's more shut off. They don't like to go toe-to-toe with people in logic. And part of the reason is because of where everything else is at in their stacking, right? They've got the 1F that knows what they want. They've got the 2V that's helpful and, what can we do? How can we do things differently? What are the options that we have where to go in the future and in life? And the 4E is kind of just deferring emotions to other people and kind of going along to get along. So the 3L is the sore thumb in this stacking. Now, when it's triggered for the FVLE, it's very noticeable, right? So that's something to pay attention to. Now, this type is not as bombastic and as dramatic as VFLE. VFLEs tend to be more tough, kind of upright. They're not as helpful. They can be helpful, but they're not many Enneagram 2s are VFLE. There are some, but not like FVLE. That 2V really changes things for this type. So if you're a super helpful person, you see yourself as helpful, that might align with this type rather than VFLE. And, the 2V of this type is the quintessential 2V. It's the one that is willing to pretty much do anything for others, as long as they've determined that it is in line with their own 1F, right? So if they plan their day out differently, they might change their plans for you and consider what you have, as long as they still get their 1F need at the end of the day, or they believe that they're in control of the 1F still. So if you're not threatening their 1F, which it's very, very hard to threaten an FVLE's 1F, right? Now, to differentiate them from FLVE, their neighboring type here in the ENA Sexta, they're like night and day. FVLEs are very, again, open, usually honest, kind, not very angry people. It's extremely hard to get an FVLE angry and explosive. They might even say that they're explosive or intimidating or angry, but you will never see it. It's something that just doesn't happen very often. This is opposing to FLVE. This is the type that can be bombastic, can be angry, and when they do explode, people notice, right? This is the 3V type compared to the FVLE, so it's not as, I would say explosive, but FLVEs aren't just exploding, it's just you notice the 3V vulnerability with FLVE more than you do with this type. So that's an easy way to differentiate the two. So these are the main differences. I would also say that FELV can be confused with this type as well. But FELVs are very, very shut off from movement in general. Again, they have results-oriented physics and volition. Those are our visceral aspects. Those are people that just get what they want and then they don't discuss it. There's not a lot of movement with them. They're very heady people unless they're the VELF. And even then, the movement isn't as noticeable because they're not talking about it. They're not discussing it with you. It's not a communication, right? So that's, for them, they communicate for the sake of communicating and gaining information and sharing information. It's not about the end goal with communication. So that's where you'll see the cutoff from FVLEs. And the FVLEs will tell you their life story if you want to sit down and listen to them. Okay, so moving on from FVLE, let's go to our second ENA representative, which is FLVE. And as you've heard before, for those of you who didn't, rewind, you can see the difference between FVLE. Now, FLVE also can get confused with LFVE, especially the LFVEs that are very organized and self-preservation oriented, care about their time, money, and everything. They can start to look the same. Now, the difference is FLVEs are less goofy. They're less funny. They're less joyful. There's a joyful nature to LFVEs that is very distinct. And FLVEs don't have this typically. Some of them can be funny, goofy, but there's always a fascination with dark things. Anything that's dark and hidden and underground and taboo. And pretty much every ENA has this. Even FVLEs, they're just the positive version of it. They kind of bring it to life and are curious about it and find it fascinating. The FLVEs are more embodying the dark the taboo, the things that you're not supposed to talk about, you're not supposed to think about. That's FLVEs can dig into that. And a lot of them do it on their own time, right? They're very private people usually. They're usually 9s, self-pres 9s. There can be some self-pres 8s thrown in there too. They usually have the wing if they are that core type for Enneagram. But these are your people that are more in tune with what they desire and what they want, and they don't want other people encroaching on that, right? So they can often get confusing with FLEVs, but the difference here is that FLVEs are more rough around the edges. They're more prone to being physically aggravated. You can see it in their body language. They can get annoyed and stressed and move every part of their body and just want you to get away from them. It's very visceral, right? We've got F and V in the visceral, which are visceral in the aggressive positions, 1 and 3, others negative, where the FLEV has emotions there. So they're more likely to whine about it or to be emotionally closed off and more afraid of others and need their personal space. It's not their personal emotional space. It's not as obvious that they're physically annoyed by other people encroaching on them. And another difference is FLVEs are usually okay with other people's emotions. They're okay with being in emotionally charged environments where people are just spouting off what they believe and think and feel and who they like and dislike. And they're also kind of openly hateful, right? This is the type that can be seen as 1E at times, so they can look like ELVFs. That's another type that we can compare and contrast. But they have this openly hateful nature to them when they're being annoyed by something. And a lot of that comes down to the 3V. And the emotions just kind of come out when they need to come out for this type. They're not taking their own emotions seriously. They're just using themselves as a vehicle to get the emotions out when they happen. And then they move on. And then they can even laugh at themselves later on. So this type is kind of notorious for saying something offensive and then getting over it, or expecting you to get over it quickly after. And if you're offended by it, they'll kind of be like, well, okay, whatever. And they're quick to want to move on. And that's an interesting part of this type as well. This is also the type that will check in with other people and how they're doing and what's going on in their life. And they're quite open to the other people's emotional experiences. Not a judgy type. So this is something that, we can differentiate this from psychosophy, or what Afanasyev originally said about the type. What I found is that they're not that judgmental about other people. They might be judgmental about your things and the way you keep your house, maybe your dietary schedule or what you're eating, or maybe you cook something nasty. They're gonna tell you, and they're gonna be judgy about it, but not always. And they're less likely to be offensive overtly until they get stressed, super stressed, and the emotions just come out. But again, they don't take it seriously. That's how you can differentiate them from FLEV. I think that's most of the types that they get confused with. Sometimes FEVLs can be confused if they're FLVE, but FEVLs just have a knack for talking to people, creating communities, getting their word out there, attracting other people to them. They're very, very people-oriented, and they're always interested in what you think about others, and then they'll give their opinion, and they want it to be a constant conversation. And FEVLs are also more interested in bettering their lives and self-help and how to enjoy things the best that they can. And that really differentiates from FLVEs, who are more detail-oriented about the specifics, the math, where things fit, how efficient things are around them. This is the type that cares more about logistics than anything else. So that's FLVE. Moving on down the line here to EVLF. This is, again, a very spirited type. This is the type that wants to gather people, opinions, ideas, spiritual beliefs, very outside of the norm. These people like to create. They're constantly creating. They need other people around them. They need intriguing new things. It looks very sevenish, and a lot of them are sevens, but that's not always the case. There can be nines, eights, sixes, fives, twos, some fours as well. This type kind of expands everywhere. So not limited to just one Enneagram type here, but EVLFs can be confused with, again, their neighboring type here, ELVF. The difference being that EVLFs are much more movement-oriented, goal-driven. They are not allergic to the G word, which is goals. Now, if you say goals to an ELVF, they cringe. They can't stand hearing that word. They don't like to think about the future. Very openly hateful. I like to say ELVFs have a hate radius, and as soon as you step inside of it, you just feel the hatred that they have for various things. Not to say that they're always hateful. They're just okay with being hateful when it's necessary, right? So, interesting tidbit about that type. What else can I say here? EVLFs can get confused with VELFs. Now, a big difference I want to note here is EVLFs are doing emotional things to get the result. It's how do they feel? So let's say both types are interested in the future and goals and attaining an experience. But for the EVLF, it's what does this emotional experience provide me with? What emotions do I get out of it? Right? So if they want to learn how to fly a plane, there's an emotional result that they're getting from flying this plane. It makes me feel happy. It makes me feel ecstatic. It makes me feel sadness, melancholy, whatever they're after. The reason they're chasing that experience is to get the emotional result. Now this is contrasting to VELFs. They might want to fly a plane to understand what it feels like to reach that thing. And I mean feels like in their spirit. So it's not about emotions, it's not about happiness, whatever. It's about what was the entire experience like? What happened? What is it like to actually fly a plane? What does it mean to meet that goal and to do it? It's like the VELFs just want to do it to mark it off the list and say, all right, I did it. I did that exact thing that I set out to do. So it's more about their personal power. Like, I set to do this thing and then I did it. I checked it off the list. I'm empowered. I am able to do that thing that I said I was going to do. I'm able to meet a future goal. So do you see the difference? Now, an EVLF might actually not fly the plane, right? Maybe they set out to fly the plane and then they go to aviation school and they start to realize that like they don't like planes, but they like the school and now they want to become a teacher. So they change their goal and they're like, all right, I'm going to be a teacher now. And it's all based on their emotional experience of going to that school. So you can see where the emotions are in the lead here. The emotions are deciding everything for the result that they want. As opposed to the VELF, they get perturbed. It's a slight to their power, to their volition, their willpower, if they can't get the thing that they set out to do. So huge, huge difference here between these two types. Now, a type that's more similar on the outside is EVLF. EVFL compared to EVLF. Now, the EVFLs are way more neurotic about their appearance, their space, what's going on with them, how they feel physically. That 3F changes it. They're also more likely to go to the gym and to be physically active, to care about their dietary needs, what they're eating, their time and resources. Also, they're more likely to have self-preservation in their stack for Enneagram, just having that 3F. So that's the main differences there. I would also say that EVFLs have that goofy nature of Dio. They're goofy, they're dramatic, they're way more likely to tell you exactly how they feel, where the EVLFs are a little bit trickier. Not to say that they're not going to tell you how they feel, but they kind of want to turn it into a logical, I don't want to use the word journey, but it's appropriate here, a logical journey. Like, what are we figuring out? What's the puzzle that we're solving here? That 3L brings more of a intrigue about logic to this type, where the EVFL is like, just tell me what the right answer is. I just want to know what the right answer is, right? They don't want to worry about the details. They're more interested in, what's going on with them physically and how do they look and feel in the body. So big difference there. All right, moving down the line with our ELVFs. We've already compared them a little bit to the previous two types. But again, ELVFs are very hateful, openly hateful when they do feel hate. So if you're sitting here like, I'm not hateful, I'm never hateful, you're not an ELVF. This is also the most mistyped type. Part of that is my fault, but I think even if people only knew psychosophy, they would still mistype as this type constantly. Where do we even start with this type? It's the aggressive poet, is what I would say. They're dramatic. They're very dramatic. They want to feel every emotional experience, just like their counterpart here, EVLF. They do everything on an emotional whim. They don't like to think of the future. So a lot of them will kind of look like sevens as well, because they're just doing whatever is fascinating to them in the moment. Now, a lot of them get caught up in their story. And this is where they're similar to the ELFV, in that both types are talking about their story of their life. And they're not stopping to imbibe in what it means to have personal power with that volition, because they're so caught up in the emotions and the logic of what's happening. So this is your type that both of these types will just talk and talk and talk. I mean, I joke with an ELVF friend of mine that, it's a 30,000 word novel, and I'm not even exaggerating. I mean, she can talk for 24 hours straight if you let her. And especially if it's about her own life and her story, because that's what an ELVF is replaying in their minds, is their life story and what it means to them. And they are very, very aggressive internally. So they're constantly judging. They're constantly frustrated about their lives. They're frustrated about whatever their ego's telling them they should be. They're worrying about the future. And this is what separates them from ELFV. Now, ELFVs can be aggressive and hateful in their own way, and they often are, but the 3F brings an anxiety and neuroticism about their bodies that gives them more of a sad overlay and more of honestly, a poetic. This is why I don't call the ELVF the poet anymore, because so many other poetic types were mistyping as this type. The ELFV is more poetic and more philosophical than the ELVF. ELVFs won't tell you about philosophy. That's what's fascinating. Now, they might teach you a philosophy that they've heard. They might go in depth about, this is what this means. If you like this philosopher, here's what he said, here's what he talked about. But they're less likely to give you their opinion about it, which is very interesting. ELFVs will give you their opinion about it. So an interesting difference here. And I'm not quite sure what to say about that. I don't know if it's the 3V coming in for the ELVF, so they're just more worried about their own future, where the ELFV is kind of, with the 4V, it's like, well, other people have philosophies, so I might as well just be open about what I think. I'm really not sure. I don't have an explanation for that, but I will say it's a very stark difference between these two types. Now, the big one, and the one that I constantly talk about, is ELVF and LEFV constantly get confused with one another. I had to change the names because so many LEFVs mistype as ELVF. So LEFV, as I call them now, the Daydreamer, That's your positive, extremely philosophical types. And these are your ones that will sit there and give you their entire opinion in one monologue about how they think, what they think life is about. And LEVFs are also guilty of this. ELVFs, again, don't do this. They're telling you more about their story and honestly about their past. This is what's happened to me. This is how I felt about it. And then ELVFs are curious of your answer and what you have to say and how you can logically build upon their story or make more sense of it. It's almost like ELVFs are trying to decode the past and make sense of it and give it some sort of meaning, some sort of emotional meaning that they are chasing after but haven't quite found, since that's kind of what drives their entire being. So that's a big difference here. And also ELVFs are very, I want to say the word gutty, but I think a better word would be rough around the edges. ELVFs will not mess around with you. And if you poke them or fight with them or argue with them or accuse them or do anything against them, they're going to have a dramatic response. Now, it doesn't always have to be hate that comes back at you. It can be crying. They can be very upset and sad. And you're going to have some sort of profound emotional effect on them. And they're going to tell you. And that's the thing. Now, they might have to disconnect from you, and ELVFs can do this. You know, because they do like their own personal time and space to kind of figure out what's going on in their emotional mind. But they will come back and they'll express what's happening internally to you. So you're never going to be guessing with an ELVF. All right, I think I've said enough about them. Let's move on to the next sexta, the Dio sexta. First type, LVFE. These are it's a rare type. I don't find a lot of them. When I do find them, I try to ask them as many questions as I can. They probably get super annoyed at me just because I want to learn more about this type. But from what I have learned about LVFEs, as rare as they are, is they really truly want to teach people things. Now, they're definitely know-it-alls, like all 1Ls, and this is coming from a 3L perspective. I'm a 3L, but, you know, they're confident in what they know and that they can figure things out. So that might come off as a know-it-all to me, but it might just come off as educational to other people. Now, this type also can look like VLFE. They can be very entrepreneurial, and they can make businesses and be obsessed with productivity, especially the 3s, and having to just get better and better and better at what they're doing. But the focus is always going to be on the logical outcome. What do they need to learn? What is it that they're chasing after? What do they need to understand about the information that's in front of them? And then they use their 2V to teach other people about it. And they monologue at people. They really will just tell people, like, this is what you do, this is what this means, you know, this is it. And they're not trying to be the expert. They don't need you to respond to them as the expert. Whereas a VLFE needs to know that other people see them as the expert. So that's a fascinating difference. The LVFE is like, if you don't see me as the expert, fine, go do your own thing. We can all live on our own and live peacefully. It is what it is. The VLFE is more concerned about mobilizing people to act as how they want them to act. So it's kind of like your leader, your ringleader. The VLFE is like, no, you need to do it this way. I'm the expert here. You know, listen to me. I will take your logical feedback, and I want to know, like, how you understand things and perceive things. But I'm the one that has the power here. So big difference between these two types. LVFEs are also what I call them as the conductor. They lead people. They're at the head of the train, but they still recognize that it's a train and that every cart attached is important. So they want to know where you would like to go, right? What stop do you want off at? So translation to that is, where do you want to go in your future? When do you want to stop on this journey? When would you like to continue? That's the LVFE's perspective. Now, this type can also be confused for LVEF. But I would say, again, LVFEs are not emotionally insecure. You don't see it in the face, too. Like LVFEs, you can just tell them what's on your mind emotionally. You can be as emotionally expressive, loud, obnoxious, opinionated as you want, and they're going to take that information into consideration. And they'll respond to you as well, and they might give you their own thoughts. There's no insecurity. Now, if you say this to an LVEF, they're going to worry about how they should present themselves emotionally back to you. There's a shut-off nature to LVEFs when it comes to emotions. Both types love to discuss possibilities of the future, and they're very open about how things can evolve. But I would say LVFEs are even more so because they don't have that 3E stopping them from moving forward. Where the LVEFs, they have to take breaks from emotions and people in emotionally charged situations. Then they'll come back energized, and they might look like an LVFE, but you'll always see that break in communication with others. The 3E gets overwhelmed. Okay, moving on to LFVE. We talked a little bit how they're similar to FLVEs, but this type is your person that will organize your entire life in an Excel sheet. I mean, they're thinking about the details. They want to know what food you eat. They want to know like your dietary restrictions. They want to know what you like aesthetically. They want to talk about all this with you. That's what differentiates them from FLVE. FLVEs know what they want. They know the styles they like. They know about all their F stuff and how they feel about it. They're not really caring about yours. Unless you ask an FLVE, then they'll do it for you, usually. Or they'll just give you an answer. The LFVE does not let that slide. If you ask them a question about physical preferences, they will not shut up. They will go on for days. They will ask you everything you could possibly want to know. Now, with one caveat, if they're a gut type, a 1, 9, or 8, they might stop, right? They might get sick of it and be like, okay, that's enough. Like, especially if they're like a 2F4 subtype or a 2F1 subtype, they might be like, all right, shut up. Like, I've had enough. I've given you enough. Or if they're very introverted, it might come down to their energy levels. The 3V might get triggered and they might be like, okay, I'm done. But they're going to remember. And here's the thing, even with the gut types, you'll see them 3 weeks later and then they'll bring it up again. Like, hey, that thing that you liked, here, I found this store that sells them. What color do you want? They bring it back to the senses. It's fascinating. That 2F just can't stop. Now, there's an extreme difference. I've seen this mistype, and it's mostly people that just don't understand AP yet, and they might be going off like psychosophy descriptions, but LFVE and LFEV, extremely different types. There's something about that switch that happens there that just makes these so different. LFEVs are, what do I even call them? Aristocratic is a good word for them. I mean, they are all about touch, prestige, perfection, getting things right, and being kind of elitist and snobbish about it. Not to say LFVEs can't be that way sometimes. I know you guys are going to light me up in the comments, but LFVEs are more goofy, funny, reactive in a good way. They can be jolly. They have that overwhelming... all these things I'm saying are Dio qualities in the Sexta that the LFEVs don't have. LFEVs, they can make jokes, but there's like biting sarcasm that's always included that the LFVE doesn't have. So that's a huge difference. So I think those are really the only two types that usually confuse themselves there. LFVEs usually know that they're 3V just because they get so stressed out over goals, so they rarely think that they're LVFE. If you are wondering between these two types, I would say if your future doesn't stress you out at all, you're going to be LVFE, because they're just more productive. They're more okay with being productive constantly. LFVEs just stress about productivity, and they don't know if they were productive or weren't productive. They can't really think in those terms. It becomes an insecurity where LVFEs, they know if they were productive or not, and they're more likely to not get stressed over it, and they'll just do it. Okay, next type, EVFL. We went over a little bit already of how they're similar to EVLF, but this type is more confused with VEFL, I would say, than any other type. And sometimes they're sextimate here, EFVL. But EVFLs, again, they're inspiring, they're leaders, they love to, they're very physically oriented people, they're movement, they just always are saying what they feel, and they're inspirational, and they can really help people inspire themselves to do things as well. And they're surprisingly blunt. So that's another thing people don't know about this type usually, is how blunt they are. They will just tell you what's on their mind. And it's very funny when they do it, because they don't get offended. So this is the 1E type that's the least likely to be emotionally offended too. They usually just say what they feel and move on. And when they do get offended, it's like a dramatic, it's like a show. It's almost like they're putting on a show. They have that Dio quality where it's goofy and kind of dramatic, and there's like a political edge to it as well. Like the ins and the outs of politics and who's who. So it can look like social even if they're not social in Enneagram. But the biggest confusion is with VEFL. Now VEFLs are way more directive and more concerned about their power in a situation and who they are and how they matter, and making sure that they get their goals met and that they understand where the future is going, and they think that they have a better grasp on it than others. So big difference here. VEFLs also are not inspirational. I mean, they can be, but it's more like VEFLs are telling you, here's what I did in my life. Here's my story. Now, listen to what I did to get where I'm at, because I'm the person that led this life. I'm this human in this body, and this is my own power and how I got here. That's VEFL version. EVFL wants the other person there so that they can discuss it out with them. How can I inspire you? How can you change your life? What are the options that you have for your own future? VEFLs don't want to do that, and they don't. They don't talk it out. They're kind of like telling you a story and of their own personal power, and you either listen or you don't with VEFLs. Right? They're more orchestrating how they want the future to go, where EVFLs aren't doing that. EVFLs are also roll with the punches better. EVFLs don't get super stressed unless it's a physical, blunder. There's not as much stress. But if a physical blunder happens, then you will see it. But with a VEFL, if things don't go their way, you're going to hear about it. Right? Because they're trying to orchestrate their future. And then again, EVFLs can be confused with EFVLs. Follow the V, follow the volition. If you're not somebody that gets stressed about your future, if you're easy with goals, if you can manage when plans change, if you're okay with that, you're more likely to be EVFL, the 2V rather than the 3V. Okay, moving on to that type, EFVL. This is your type number 2 that has a hate radius, but they are much easier to calm down, I would say, than an ELVF. With an ELVF, you can't stop them. If they go into hater mode, I mean, you're going to hear about it and hear about it and hear about it, and it's not going to stop, and good luck. With an EFVL, you can distract them much easier, and you'll see that within them. Like, they'll have a dramatic meltdowns where you get in their hate radius, and they're hating on everything, and they're annoyed, and they're crying, and they're having dramatic moments, and they're telling you their emotions, but they have that 2F. So if you can bring the conversation to sensations in the body and how things look, or makeup, or, you know, just talking about people and things and just their surroundings and what's their latest thing that they're into, that's going to kind of divert them, right? They don't get logically entwined with their hatred like the ELVFs do. So the EFVLs they can let it go easier, and they can also make art easier. So they've got that 2F, which gives them movement. It gives them physical movement. They're okay with moving. They're okay with doing things and expressing themselves and showing that you can see it in the way that they wear their makeup for, you know, more feminine EFVLs. And then for the more masculine EFVLs, you can see it in what they will do and for others, and like pushing, and I can go get you this, or I can cook you this thing, or what do you like to eat? You know, lots of chefs are EFVL. And, you know, it's not gender specific, so it can cross over. It doesn't matter which gender you identify as. It all crosses over depending on, you know, masculine, feminine, androgynous, wherever you fall in that spectrum. But EFVLs are also, what's missed about this type is they can be extremely goal-oriented as a 3V type, but they're obsessive. They're so insecure about their 3V that they'll go one of two ways. They'll either be the shutdown, dramatic, artistic, sad person, or they'll be the hyperactive, have to meet my goals, have to be the best, have to never stop 3V. And in both cases, they will shut down if you ask them about their goals or their future. They don't know how to talk about it unless you give them kind of a safe space or safe outlet to really talk about their identity and who they are and what they believe their power is in the world. This type can also be confused with FEVL. Now, the big difference is that FEVLs they don't want to discuss all that 2F stuff with you. So they don't, you know, they might want to know, like, what's your latest product that you've been using so that the FEVL can check it out themselves. But it's all about consumption and enjoyment with the FEVL. It's not about their emotional life experience and where they're at in life and talking to people about how they feel and their own story. And FEVLs don't have a hate radius either. With FEVLs are more like a volcano. Like if you poke at them, they're going to blow up, and it's anger that comes out. It's not drama. EFVLs are drama. Okay, I'll leave you with that last sentence. VLFE. We're into our tria sexta here. I think I'm moving decently quick, right? 43 minutes. I'll try to stay under 2 hours. VLFEs, a Pathfinder, Path Maker. I used to call them the Enterpriser, but I got rid of that because a lot of other types of Enterprise. These are your experts. These are your people that want to be CEOs. They want to lead. They're very power-seeking, power-oriented people. They rise to prominence. They want to be secure in their assets and what they hold and their monetary power as well. So in some ways, we could compare them to FLVEs. Some people do mix these two types up, but these are your people that are assured in their own power. And it's about their identity. It's not about their physical assets representing who they are. It's that since they are strong and powerful, they get the money, right? They get the power. But that's where they start to worry. They start to worry when their physical assets and their body doesn't feel powerful or doesn't aid them in feeling powerful. And this type, you know, that differentiates them from FLVEs, because FLVEs are like, I'm in my body, I am who I am, don't touch me or I'll become violent, don't mess with me, don't cut me off from my living quarters, don't do anything that will affect my physical body and how I want my physical body to be. Now VLFEs, that's not the case. VLFEs worry about it. They also worry about their attraction levels, which is a common 3F thing. They worry about how they look, whether they're skinny, and it can affect a lot of different areas of life too. It doesn't just have to be like trying to seduce a mate. It can be like their social status, like people won't like me if I don't look this particular way, or it can be about their self-pres, like self-preserving in Enneagram, like, well, if my body is not okay, then you know that means there's some underlying disease if I feel something's off, and then they'll worry about that, and then I'm gonna die, and I gotta save up all this money because what if I need it for X, Y, and Z thing that could make me feel insecure? So a lot of things can happen here in the VLFE's mind that can set off that 3F. But the difference with FLVE is that they do want to discuss it because they're thinking about all the options, right? They want to discuss it with others, and they also want to find like ideal solutions for all their problems. So again, they're always thinking in terms of being empowered and power and the future and goals. So they're wanting to do something with all that insecurity. It drives them crazy that they even have the insecurity to begin with, and that it can push them to become even bigger, better, badder CEOs and leaders in the world, really. So these are your people you'll see in highly prominent positions of power, be it politically, be it in organizations, world leaders, heads of NASA. I mean, Elon Musk is a good example. I know a lot of you probably hate him, but he is a good example of this type. Even like Tyra Banks would be a good example, kind of how she runs the fashion industry, or did for a long time, and was all in media and producing and all that. But that's a good example of this type. Now, this type can also get confused. Again, we talked about with LVFE. They're less concerned about what other people want for them. As selfish as that sounds, we're all selfish with our first attitude. So VLFE is like, I want what I want. I will listen to other people's ideas and the way that they think and their opinions, and we can talk about details and all that. And they're very creative people, especially when they have others around them to kind of bounce ideas off of. But the goal that they want, they will not discuss it with you. So that's the difference. We can also see they can get confusing with VFLEs, but VLFEs, they're more cerebral, and they care more about being the expert in the room. And it's not about like pushing and moving and the physical power. For them, it's more about, mind power and expertise. Now, this is how they're similar to VLEF. So VLFEs they have that expertise nature. They can be like professors in colleges and whatnot. And they can really care about just knowing things, knowing important things and information. But VLFEs, again, they're more, there's this money and movement and running around and being hyperactive. It's visceral, right? They have the two visceral aspects in the aggressive positions here with V and F. So they're pushing, just like the VEFL, who's orchestrating, just like the FLVE that is creating monetary value through objects and things, and just like the FEVL that's like deep bodily enjoyment, that visceral enjoyment of the body. All these four types have F and V in the aggressive position. So you're going to see this visceral movement orientation in what they do. Okay. Oh, another difference here between VLEF and VLFE. VLEFs are more talkative, and they're more concerned with the academic portion of expertise. VLFEs want to put it into action. Like, here's how to be the expert, now go do it. Now go mobilize a force of people to do this thing for you. Right? Like, I'm 100% sure that whoever led the building of the pyramids was probably a VLFE. Yeah, other types, less likely to do that. Maybe a VFLE could do that. or a VFEL. Those two types, come in second place when it comes to that. But the person actually forcing others to draw out plans and to finding the expertise in other people as well. That's another thing that VLFEs believe that they're good at, and they try to enforce in their surroundings. Okay. Next type, VFLE here. This is your dramatic 1V. This is your 1V that just is so movement oriented, is constant, is always needing to do new things. They do care about their power as well. They care about their future. They believe they're in charge of their future. And not unlike VLFE, they're also can be entrepreneurs. But they're more hands-on. They're more likely to micromanage people. And they're also more likely to be funny and to joke around and to have kind of like that human spirit that FVLEs have, which we talked about their similarities earlier. Rewind back if you didn't hear that. But this type is, again, they're more human. They're less detached from their physical selves, and they're not as worried about their physical body. So that actually empowers them to be hands-on leaders and kind of join the people that they're leading to do certain things with. Now, this type also worries more about being logically inconsistent or being stupid and being wrong, so they overdo it with their bodies usually. They overdo it with their energy levels to try to make up for their insecure logic. And it's funny because this type, you'll see them miss very important small details that they should have recognized just because they were so wrapped up in just like being a leader, like pushing others and kind of being hands-on. Like they have the two visceral aspects as self-positive, V and F. So there's less of an aggression. There's more of a willingness to help people, like to go into businesses and help them, become better. But again, they've got the 1V, so it's like do it my way. But they're more likely to show people how their way works themselves. Where the VLFE doesn't do that. The VLFE is like, here's the paper guide, follow the guide. I'm going to tell you how it works. Now go do it. And if it messes up, they're going to write up a new plan and a new guide for you of how to do it. The VFLEs are not this way. They're going to show you, right? They want the hands-on because that's the body. It's sensation. Let me show you how to flip this waffle the right way or whatever, You can think of it as the Firestarter. I mean, this is... They actually start the fire. they have a hand in it. The fire is not some conceptual thing like for VLFE. They can also get confused with VFEL. Actually, I've confused these two types before a lot. It's really hard because VFELs hide their 3E and they can be workhorses. I mean, VFELs can just nonstop work, but they're more idealistic. So they're part of the Tessera Sexta, which is like idealism and aristocratic and elitist, and I have to be the best that I can be, and I have to perfect everything. That's why there's a lot of ones in that Sexta and one fixes. And that's different than VFLE. When VFLEs, screw up, they are able to do other things. They let it go quicker because it's not about the ideal. It's about just constant movement and constant getting better and finding your power. VFLEs want to go out and find their power. They have the 4E, so it's not like the responses that they get from people for all the crazy stuff that they do, it doesn't stop them. The only thing that stops them is when they start to feel stupid. So that's why like FVLEs, they'll often ignore their 3L. They're the second most likely type to ignore their 3L. Okay. Next type. Where are we at? ELFV. Okay, ELFV is the Chronicler. I love this type to death. One of my favorite types. ELFVs, again, like ELVFs, are storytellers. They're less likely to have a hate radius. Now, it will come out, especially if they're the 4. You'll see what they hate. and they're very like no against everything. Like their favorite thing to say is no, but they're kind of soft. Not gonna lie, they're not rough like ELVF. ELFVs are kind of soft because they're worried about the body. You can see the neuroticism about their body come out to where they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm not attractive, I'm not good enough for others, or I'm not sexually appealing to the people I want to be sexually appealing to. And, in whatever way that neuroticism comes out in 3F, a lot of them can be obsessed with the gym. And they get caught in doing the same things over and over. And they start to notice that they're doing that, and it drives them crazy, but they don't know how to escape out of it. So a lot of times they'll go to like a 1V and be like, well, what do I do? And they'll just listen to whatever the 1V says. So it's another big difference between this type and ELVF. This type listens to the feedback that they get from other people extensively, and they'll take on that feedback. And a lot of them are still 4s. So that's a weird thing, right? A lot of them will be told, no, you're not an Enneagram 4 because you're, even though your instinct is telling you no, they still will take advice from people for their future and follow it. So it's a weird looking type when you're an ELFV4. But anyway, it's a big difference here between these two types. ELFVs are also, they're philosophical people. They are intensely interested in academia. This type, the ones that I've met are just like, they can be in school forever. I've met so many of them that will be in school until they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They believe in the power of academics, and that's kind of how they learn about 3F and the physical world. They do it through learning about biology, chemistry, philosophy, like relating all these things together. And it becomes an interesting hodgepodge of their personality because they know a lot, right? You talk to them and they've heard little bits of everything from everywhere, and it's so cool to see that come up. And they, a lot of them, they can be image types 2, 3, and 4 in Enneagram, so you'll see them kind of presenting themselves a certain way, and they really want your feedback and approval. Even if they're the 4 and they don't necessarily want your approval unless it's like true, they still have this 4V nature to them. And again, this is a weird 4V type because they are quite movement oriented. It's just the academic part of their minds is what's leading them. And they also, again, they get stuck. They get stuck in doing the same things over and over and in routines. And the worry all comes out through the mind and, physical things that they feel in their body. This is also the type that will, with EVFL, this is the type that will feel something wrong in their body and they've already planned their funeral. Like, I'm going to die now. That little tweak happened in my leg, so I have cancer, I'm going to die. They get on Dr. Google, and, not to say other types can't do this, because there are a lot of other ones that do it, but this type is likely to be loud about it and tell you, and they add it into their experience. That's also why this type is the chronicler. They're telling you their life experience, and they're giving you the philosophy of their life, and they want your feedback. They need people's opinions as well to kind of add into their own emotional experience of the world. And their emotions drive them. This is a type that really believes, they have some sort of emotional future goal that they have to reach. And if they don't reach it, then, they have to do something important in the world. Now, they can get confusing with LEFV, but this type they're not as much know-it-alls, right? They're not going to have that 1L overlay of like, here's the monologue of what I believe, you better listen to it. No, this type is more like, I could be right, but I might not be right, and you might be right as well. And I think, they want to talk to you as well about your opinions. And it's fascinating because they can, again, they have the hate radius a little bit where they don't like a lot of people, and little things about others can really annoy them. But that's the driving force of why they might not want your opinion, because they might think that you're kind of emotionally undesirable to them. So it's not a 2L thing, it's actually 1E. But that's the difference between them and LEFVs, because LEFVs will listen to your emotional experience. It doesn't matter who you are. They're more annoyed when you think that you know things and they know you don't. And they're like, no, my opinion here is right, yours is wrong. So you're going to see that difference. Also, LEFVs are more like word salad-y, I would say. Sorry, Tesseros, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. You're my conflicting sexta here, but LEFVs will engage in word salad, and they know what they mean. Nobody else in the room has any freaking clue what they mean, and 4Ls will try to pretend they know what they mean, but they believe what they're saying. ELFVs are more communicative about their emotions, and they really want others to understand and get it. Like, this is what I'm feeling, do you get it? And that's a huge difference between these two types. What else? Sometimes they can be confused for EFLV, especially the like really artistic ELFV. They will look like their F and L is switched, but EFLVs they're more funny and jolly and goofy and sarcastic, and they can like make up characters, and they can have that meek nature, and they can kind of talk about their life stories and whatnot, but it's to hide their vulnerability around logic, and ELFVs do not have that. They have no vulnerability in logic. In fact, that's what keeps them in school forever, because they're like, this is the only place that gives me the information I need about life and about my experience, so I'm going to keep this up, and I'm going to keep telling other people about it. And that's the big difference here between these two types. Okay, moving on to our last type here in the Tria Sexta. We're an hour through this, so it's going to be about 2 hours. EFLVs, again, satirical, funny, jokester, comedians, clownish, happy, random, so many words I could use to describe them. Intrigued by logic, intrigued by off-the-wall things, but they want to share it. That's what's interesting. And this is also your 3L type that acts dumb. They actually like pretend to be dumb. So you might think they're EFVL, like, oh, they don't care about logic. They just say whatever. You can make fun of them, and they're not going to really take a lot of offense to it. You can joke around with them a lot. They adopt this outer appearance of being somebody who doesn't care about their logic, but they do. They deeply care about their logic, and they're using this character to kind of override the 3L, and they all do it in different ways depending on Enneagram type, but they all do it. So this type doesn't often get confused with any type. Again, sometimes ELFV and sometimes EFVL, but this is usually from an outside perspective. If you're an EFLV, you know you're an EFLV. It's very obvious. So there really isn't much to say for comparing and contrasting, but I will do it. So EVLF, weirdly enough, can be similar to this type. They share the 1E and 3L, but the difference is EFLVs they're task goal oriented, in that they pick something and they go for it, and they find one structural road to get there, and they don't stray often from that road. So this is again a 4V type, just like their sister type here, ELFV, that stays on task and does the thing. Right now, this is also the type that wants to talk about every little physical discrepancy in their environment, like, this tastes like that, this looks like this. They're masters of comparison. They will compare everything to everything else, including people. So this is your type that will notice like what you're wearing and how it looks like this character from something else. They're kind of imaginative people, I would say. Usually. Some of them aren't as imaginative, and they're more what's the word? They need like structure. so they don't like to imagine. But usually this type is crazy imaginative. EFLVs are also, when I say clowns, I mean like they have to make things funny and exciting and enjoyable. They have that EF block there in the top, and the 3L just feeds in interesting information because they don't want to look stupid and like they don't know things. So it's a very verbal type, right? They're verbal, but in a joking sort of way, and it's more jovial. It's not informative like ELFVs. It's more about the mood, the atmosphere, what's going on around them, right? So that's now we could compare this to FELV, who is the mood maker, but FELV is like setting the stage, setting the mood. It's all about setting. With EFLV, it's about finishing the mood. Like, here's employing it, right? They're not setting the stage. They're actually on the stage performing it. And that's the huge difference. And they're not as concerned about people's emotional reactions to them. They hide their 1E. They hide everything about them. That's another interesting thing about this type. They hide their 1E. They're not as openly derisive of people and things. They don't really have a hate radius. They try to turn it into jokes because they don't want people messing with their emotions or keeping them from emoting in the ways that they want to. So they will hide it from others. So it can be a tricky type. The EFLVs, they know that they're EFLV usually, but other people won't. So this is just good advice for people trying to learn about them. Okay, our next type that we're going to get into here is VFEL. This is our type that I call the Arbiter, and this is like your leader type, very work-oriented. They also have an artistic edge that a lot of people don't see right away. But this type can be confused with VFLE, and I've went over that a little bit just because of how pushy they can be to get what they desire. Now, they also have this idealistic nature where they like perfection. They like to do things right the first time. They want to make sure that they're getting what they want in life and that they're reaching their power, their fullest potential for their power. So you'll see that come out to play. Now they can look like FVELs. Both of these types have that 3E that they can kind of just run over and completely ignore, and they can be so caught up in everything that they're doing in life that they don't pay attention to their 3E. Now, both types are quite sensitive, but VFELs are headstrong, and what I mean by that is they have to get the thing done that they have set out to do. It's about their own personal power, where FVELs, they want things to be organized in a certain way. They like comfort. They want to feel, the blanket on the body or the good food, the taste that they love, or it's about reaching that goal for the body and the sensations, where VFELs don't have that. They actually like a lot of variety with their body. That's what gives them their artistic nature, is they can think about, how everybody perceives everything differently, and they find that fascinating. So they like that variety when it comes to that. Now they can also look like VEFLs, and this is usually the more masculine presenting or males that will kind of confuse these two types, because VEFL men can be a little rough, a little tough, a little in your face, but the difference here would be that your VEFLs are more life coachy, telling you how you should live your life and trying to get you to do things and orchestrating you as a person and using emotions to do it. VFELs are more hands-on. They're more, I'm going to get this thing done. I will go here, go there, do this thing, lead this thing, And that can also lead them to be a little bit more independent. Like if I want something done, I'm going to do it myself for VFELs. Or VEFLs are like, no, I'll get you to do it. I'll find a way to get other people to do it. So that's a big difference here between these two types. We'll just sachet that into the VEFL. This is your orchestrator. I'm trying to remember what I used to call them. I can't even remember. I'll have to go look at my old video. The harmonizer is what I used to call them, and they're anything but that. I don't know why I chose that name, but we've definitely changed that to the orchestrator now because they don't always want harmony. VEFLs can actually be quite dramatic, and they can just do anything to try to get people to do things for them or to help them reach their goal. And they're great at listening to other people's stories and what they feel and think, and they want to know that there are people around them and that other humans exist. Again, with having high E and high V, self-positive E and V, that they're always going to be curious about the human spirit, the human drive, and this type is. Now, what separates them from VELF is this type doesn't want to spend too much time thinking about logical details. It's like, no, I just give me the right answer. They're more apt to listen to people who know better than them, and they'll admit it too. This person knows more than me, so I'll let them do it. They're the smart person, is what they'll say. But they're not putting themselves down. They just don't want to waste time on it. And some of them are extremely smart and have very high IQs, and they're quick to recognize things and the answer to things. They just would rather not waste their time on it. And they also don't trust themselves with it, but they do trust other people with logic. And the VELF is not that way. VELF is highly reactive when it comes to logic, very insecure, do not like to be wrong, will tell other people when they're wrong, will silently seethe about logic. But both these types do is lead others and try to become something bigger than what they currently are. There's a high focus on the future and where they want to be and attaining that personal power and then expressing it, and listening to how other people got to where they're at and their emotional turmoil and their life that they went through. So there's an exchange of emotions that both of these types have that can kind of make them confusing. But the VEFL is just more, again, detail-oriented as well when it comes to the physical realm. They want the physical details. Like, my stapler should be over here. My papers should be over there. Like, I want this food. I hate this food. They get really freaked out about being ugly, looking unattractive as well, with like all three Fs. And they want to talk about it, and they wish people would help them out more on what they could do and give them more options so that they can figure out what will work for their future goals. All right, moving on to the next type, which is LFEV, the Connoisseur. I've left this name the same for years now, ever since 2017. So this type is can be confused with a lot of different types. Mainly FLEV, I would say, is the biggest mistype here, but this type doesn't want to go over the past. They don't like to think about the past. They will take details from the past and history, but it's because they're worried about the ideal future and where they want to go in life. So that differentiates them from FLEVs that constantly talk about the past and history and how history is always reliving itself and reinventing itself, and it's all circular, and we just change a couple dynamics here and there, and it's a fascinating part of FLEVs when you start listening to them, as it's all a reiteration of how the past applies to the future, or to the present and the future, really. LFEVs are more singular. They're more like, this is my life philosophy, this is what I believe is beautiful, this is what I believe is emotionally appealing to myself, and they also are very highly sensitive to their environment. And you might confuse them with a 3F type like LEFV because they're so particular about what they want and desire. But they're whiny. They tend to be more whiny than LEFVs. And some of them are stoic, and they will let their whininess out in creative ways so people don't catch on to them being kind of perfection-y in that way and whiny. But they don't like emotional criticism and overly emotional feedback that surprises them. They hate that, right? They'd rather. This is a weird type as well because sometimes they don't like 2E types because 2E types will prod at their 3E and like try to get them to emote, and their initial reaction is to do the shutdown, especially the 9s. And they might actually prefer 1Es in some instances where they're like, okay, well, you just have your emotions over there. Like, I don't agree with you and I think you're annoying, or whatever thought they have on it, but they separate it out. So that the idealism of this type can make them tricky. So they might look 4E too. You might think they're 2E or 4E, but really it's this 3E shutdown mode where they're just trying to hyper focus on what they find beautiful, interesting, what philosophies they find fascinating, how they believe they're correct. And they're also infamous for comparing and contrasting, which is funny enough, that's the title of this video, but comparing and contrasting people, things, and emotions. So always creating a hierarchy of better and worse and trying to be interesting in themselves. Many of them are 4s. This is one of the uppity 4 prototypes. And, the reason I call them the Connoisseur is they get into the nitty-gritty of every little detail about presentation of things. So these are your people that they could be cooks or chefs, but they will look at every last detail of even grains of rice, and making sure that it all is fitting into their desired, image. It's about perfection, exactness. And it's not like LFVEs, where LFVEs are like, I'm going to organize your whole life and my life, and we're going to make it work, and I'm going to consult you and tell you what, how to plug this information into your Excel sheet and make it do this thing. No, that's not what LFEVs do. They're more about the emotional effect that precision has on reality. So that's the LFE portion. They're also way less movable. It's hard to get them out of their routines and things that they've already established for themselves because they believe they're just perfecting each little thing day by day. So that's another way that you can see the LFEV materialize. And this type can also be confused for LVEF. But the difference is there's not an action plan being set into place for this type. They're minuscule. They zoom in on things, where the LVEF zooms out. It's like, how can I create higher systems of humanity? How does biology, chemistry, how does this all interrelate to theorize everything and to understand how it all works together? And LVEFs are also, they can start businesses and be entrepreneurial, kind of like other VL types. But this type doesn't do that. They're more singular focused and detail oriented, down to the very last little small minute detail. They're building bit by bit on their life. Okay. Next type, LEFV, the most mistyped type, as in they never realized they're LEFVs. LEFVs will type as ELFV, ELVF, VELF, LEVF, sometimes weird stuff like EFVL, VLEF. I've seen it all. This type does not recognize themselves, and I really don't know why. I haven't figured it out yet. A small minority of them do, so I won't throw them, I won't throw them in the bin with the other ones, but usually this type does not figure themselves out. Now, this type is the dreamer, the daydreamer, and I used to call them the philanthropist, but that's like way too specific. So, the daydreamer, this type is philosophical. They think about all of their surroundings. They think about their body. They think about humankind, education, how everybody is connected. They think about life and death, and they can go on a complete tangent about their own philosophy of life, whether you're listening or not. And that's very unique about this type. No other type does it in the way that this type does. And, they can get confusing with ELFV, because you think that they're like telling you about their life, and they seem logically open, but they've already come to a conclusion. And you can see it in the monologue, right? It's not a story about their life, it's a monologue of their philosophy on life. They're not being personal. They prefer another person to be there once they get personal, because then they have a person to bounce it off of emotionally. Where ELFVs will just write 20 paragraphs about their lives to a stranger where it's all personal and you're like, what the heck? LEFVs don't do this. Now, they will talk about sensations of the body when it freaks them out. Like maybe they'll write a paragraph of some bad chicken they ate in, 2004. But they will usually relate it to a philosophy of life, and it's very interesting to see it because they all do this weird thing, where they think they're being like kind of deep about something physical, and they've like found some key to how it relates to something logical, and they're really like teaching you a philosophy of life, and they're trying to get you involved. They're kind of like emotionally prodding at people to be involved, and that's unique. ELVF doesn't do that. ELFV doesn't do that. VELF doesn't even do this. The LEFV is very, very particular. Now, some of them also can think that they're FELV, and these two types can look similar. FELV, again, this is your mood maker. This is the person that is setting a mood, and it's all about the setting. How do the curtains look? How do the backdrop look? What does this lipstick do to my face? Like, what does this style of dress? They get obsessed over fashion and statements and aesthetics and looks and ways that they can appear, right? EFVL, EFLV, FELV, and FEVL all can do this, but LEFV does not do this. That is a huge, huge difference, and it's hard to get them to see that. Yes, I think that's all I have to say. We could go into a whole video, and I will eventually get to the LEFV, but it'll probably be like 3 hours long because that type is very, very unique and fascinating, and mistypes is everything else. So, all right, that rounds out our Tessera Sexta onto Pente Sexta, or in Greek, I guess it's Pont. Who are we starting with? I think I have these mixed up. Yes, I do. We'll start with VLEF. Okay, our VLEFs are... what do I call them? Got some brain fog. I can't even think of the name right now. Anyway, VLEFs, they are experts in the room. They're the person that wants to know everything about everything. Now, some of them can be loud and obnoxious, but some of them are quiet and reflective and kind of afraid of being emotionally open. So you have two different subtypes here that are commonly seen, that are pretty different from one another. But what you will see with VLEFs is a focus on politics. And that doesn't have to be global politics or politics, the way that we normally think of it, like who's running for Senate or whatever. It could be politics of a business, politics of a friend group, politics of relationships with one another, with people. There will always be some sort of focus on this and how it relates to their power, their personal power, and what they're capable of. And they always believe they're capable of a lot, but they see emotions as really stopping them. And they try to become kind of philosophical about it. I would say this is another philosophical type, but very looking for evidence to prove that philosophy is true. So this type wants to see and know that they are experts and that what they do works. And they love to talk with other people about new ideas and what they think. And there's an inner relation here between volition and logic. So it creates this yang energy of really finding the truth in power, and what motivates what, and what motivates whom. So there's a lot of no idea why I said it like that. It just has the VLEF vibe. I call them the Inquisitor, by the way. And I used to call them, I don't know, something argumentative. I can't remember, but they're not all argumentative, so I got rid of that. But yeah, this type it can be confused with VLFE, but they're not as movement oriented. They're more heady, right? You talk to them and they just want to sit there and discuss everything with you. So there's less of a focus on movement, constant creation. No, it's more about reflection with them, and reflection and refinement of what is true, and how you can show others and learn truths from others too. Like, although they're argumentative, they're only argumentative about what they have found out is absolutely true. There's no way you can prove it wrong. They're going to say it. And if you deny it, it's just because they think you're stupid. So they're not as argumentative as I once made them out to be. They're actually quite open if they respect you, and also if they feel emotionally safe with you, which is different from VLFEs. VLFEs will let anybody say anything and emote however they want, and as long as it's not encroaching on their personal power, they don't care. Now, your emotions are a door into your intentions, and VLFEs know that, but they also can separate out who's just emotional and who's being emotional because they're unreasonable. And that's very different from VLEFs. They don't trust themselves to accurately gauge people and what they're up to and what they're about. So you will see that kind of come out in the differences between these two types. Let's see, what else do they confuse? Sometimes they can think they're VELFs if they've worked on their emotions and their emotional world and they're more okay with it. They'll be like, oh, well, I'm, VELF, and no. And a lot of that is because they're concerned about being correct and being right and finding the truth, so they think that they're 3L, but they're not. They just have the both communicative functions in the middle, aspects in the middle, E and L. So they're just constantly processing out emotions and logic, and they can kind of get confusing because they're both communicative and they involve words and language and all that to describe. So that can be the difference. But VELFs are way more gray, is what I would say. They're hard to identify. They don't understand themselves, but they're trying to understand themselves, and that's the biggest difference, I would say. Let's see, what else? That's really the only types that they get confused with. Yeah, they rarely get... I've never seen them get confused with LVEF. Maybe a couple VLEFs have mentioned to me, like, I thought of LVEF, but... Oh, actually, EVLF can get confused with VLEF. Especially, like, your EVLFs that are more educational and that are, like, trying to teach people how things work. Me, for instance. I can look a little 1V at times. It can look like, the EVLF is telling people how they should think and how they should feel, and describing, different parts of humanity. And that can be similar to the VLEF's interests. And VLEFs can be very interested in the occult, or just religion in general. They can be super interested in going into the past about their own religion and figuring out, like, how it works and what it means and why it matters and all that. So that's an interesting part of them. So they can look spiritual like EVLFs, but they tend to be more just rigid in their line of... I won't even say thinking. It's almost like rigid in their power and what they believe they're good at and what they bring to the world. Very rigid and like, this is who I am, this is what I bring, this is what I'm going to do, these are my plans, I'm going to stick to them. And when they don't, they get really stressed out and overwhelmed. So it's another interesting thing. Okay, on to the VELFs, the most interesting and fascinating of of all the types here are harbingers. Now, our VELFs are what I call the gray type. They can blend into anything and everything. They often don't recognize themselves until later on in their journey through the AP types. And they can misidentify as many of the other types for varying reasons. This type is a humanitarian, I would say they consider themselves. They're optimistic, and you might not realize it because they can be extremely negative on the outside. They're another one of the hateful types, especially the 4s. But it's usually not directed at anything or anyone. It's just you can see their annoyance and that they haven't reached the goal that they want to reach because they're hell-bent on experiencing the things that they desire to experience. So desire is a good word when you have V and E together like that in the top. Just desiring something, right? They just have to get their desires met. And when they don't, it drives them crazy and the hateful part comes out. They also blend in. They're like chameleons. They will blend into a situation to get their desired outcome. So they're tricky, tricky people. The bad ones can be very manipulative and can convince you to do things for them. They're paying attention to all the details and how people act. They're the human watchers. They watch people and they figure out how they work and operate, and then they use that to inform themselves of their own power. Now, if depending on whether they're toxic or non-toxic or whatever, that informs you of what they will do or what they will use it for. But the ones that are bad are really something else. I mean, we're talking about some of the worst people in history here, and also some of the best people in history. So it's just your perception here of which one you get. But this type can be confused for literally anything. If they are attempting to get power or get their goals met, they will act like any type. But usually they know they're VELF. They'll get to that spot where they realize they're VELF. They can look like VLEFs. Again, they can hide their own emotions. They can be very weirded out by what they truly feel because they're so focused on the interaction of emotions between themselves and others. They find themselves in mid-level management a lot, which is strange because they desire so much more for themselves usually, but they easily fill in positions because of how chameleon-like they are. So they often get pushed into roles at work that they don't necessarily want to be in, but it works for them, especially if their self-preservation lasts. They aren't always thinking about their physical security and a 4F type. So yeah, they can look like VLEF. They can also look like VEFL. Some of them do become fascinated by physical sensation, but it's a desired result. So there's not as much... When they get annoyed of the physical realm, it's because they didn't get what they want, right? Where the VEFL is like, oh my god, I'm ugly, or oh my god, I have this pain in my side, I have appendicitis, I'm going to die. And then they make it everybody else's problem around them. VELFs don't. It's more like, this got in the way of something that I wanted, and I hate it. That's where you see their hate come out. So that's the big difference between those two types. VELF can also be confused for ELVF because of the hate radius that they have. So you might see them be confused. Let's see, what other types here? I didn't write anything else down for them. Oh, sometimes VLFEs, they can be confused, especially if they get into like high prominent positions where they're telling everybody else what to do and being leader-esque. They can get confused with them. And then I talked earlier about how EVLFs can be confused with VELF, but once you start watching them, you see the difference. EVLFs are more openly spiritual, and they share their emotions and what they desire, and they almost say their emotions as like obvious and this is self-evident, where VELFs don't. They're hiding the emotions. You're not going to see them as much. And they're also more aware of other people's emotions and encouraging them to emote and to process out what it is they're feeling and why. where EVLFs don't do that. Okay, unless they learn to. Like, EVLFs can learn how to do it if they get into like educational spaces, but it's just an act. That's not their that's not their native attitude. It's not what's really happening underneath the surface. Okay. Next type, FLEV. We talked a little bit how they can be confused with FLVEs. We talked about how they can be confused with LFEVs. And the biggest confusion, which is a weird one, and I've made a video about this on TikTok, is LVEF and FLEVs. Mainly it was when I called LVEFs the theorist. Everybody would confuse these two types, but FLEVs are actually much more theoretical than LVEFs. They're comparing everything from the past to now. It's like, how did we get where we're at? How do you follow the time to get to our current present state of being? Because they're looking at the physical construct of reality. They're looking at, like, you know, modern housing and modern architecture and, you know, plumbing and the worldwide connected universe. And, like, how does it all work together? I'm not doing them any justice in the way that I'm explaining this, but if you're an FLEV, you'll understand what I mean. This type is fascinated by the occult as well. Out of all the types, I would say this one is the most obsessed with the occult, intrigued by it. They want it to be real almost, so they have a little bit of a magical quality to them, but they're also like not sure and very skeptical of what is true. So they'll find like all these neat little details in the past and they'll try to make them real through the present. They're notorious for like having random books on things that nobody's ever heard of before, and they're wanting to talk about all this weird information, or what regular people would just find weird. And they know that it's weird too, but yeah, they go through all this. Now, they also can take up like physical activities like gardening and maybe playing a sport or running or just doing something like cooking. That's common for them, but they're slow to change and make progress. They're more of a heady type that kind of wants their comforts and wants their things to stay put and stay still. So it's hard to get them to change their routines. They can also not realize that they're 1F, so that's why they get confused with LVEFs, because they just think, well, I just do what I do. I like what I like. They think it's not that important. But it is. When you try to take it away from them, then they realize, like, oh, that is very deeply vulnerable, that 1F of mine. That's how they can start to realize that they're 1F. And this type can also just be sneering, like just doubtful of anyone and anything. They really get disgusted by over emotional displays. They can just, but they'll make fun of it. They tend to satirize like the EFLVs. And they often make characters, so they kind of explore reality by doing characters. They often have like voices that they can do, and they can copy people's mannerisms, and they can act kind of dumb and stupid and pretend like they know less than they do, similar to the EFLVs. So be careful of that as well. Yeah, I think that's everything. Yeah, mainly just LVEFs. Oh, these people are also like philosophical in a way, but the way that they describe philosophy to others, they relate it to actual real world things that you can see, right? So like Nietzsche, and like Nietzsche was always giving Nietzsche, however you want to say it, he's always giving like physical representations of his philosophy and something that you can relate it back to. Or Darwin, like literally just showing you how life evolves and the similarities in the bone structures and how they advanced over time. Do you see this focus on time and how things change over time and the past flowing into the present and the future? Like that's that's the intrigue here with FLEVs, and they don't even have to be NI valuing in socionics or NI dominant or whatever you want to call it in MBTI and Jungian typology. Some of them can be terrible at it, but they still have a fascination with it. Yes. Okay, moving on to the next type, FELV, the mood maker. I've talked a lot about this already. They can be confused with many different types depending. And this is also a type that can kind of not recognize themselves on occasion. I think all the 2E types can have issues with this, but the FELV is a very sensual type, super sensual. They always want to make a setting, set the mood, set the stage, set the aesthetic. They want to look a certain way. They always want to have their comforts. They need to have their routine, their schedule, but they don't freak out if their schedule is not correct, right? Like, if we compare them to FEVLs, which some of them mistype as, FEVLs freak out about their schedule or things not going the right way or their lifestyle being bothered, where FELVs are like, well, yeah, it changed, whatever. Like, it is what it is. I can make it work. They're very stress resistant in that sense. Now, they don't like to be wrong. They have the 3L in there. They don't like people insinuating that they're stupid or correcting their mistakes or anything like that. So they will kind of pull back when, there's too much of that going on. And they can become kind of hateful, but their hate usually comes out in their art and the way that they express themselves. This is also your type that's kind of pop star-ish. I don't know how to say it, but they can embody a mood and they can get a lot of people to understand that mood, right? Which is what pop music is. It's embodying a mood. Even like indie music, I would say, is a lot of FELVs. It doesn't have to be pop. It's just embodying an aesthetic, a mood, something that makes people understand who they are and what they're about. And they're slow. Again, the 4V types are a little bit slower than most. And that's okay. I'm not dissing them for that. It's just they're slow to change, slow to make changes in their lives. Unless somebody comes along and tells them do this. And then they're more likely to take that advice as well. Or believe that advice is useful. Like, oh, they're seeing something about my future that I don't see, so I should listen. Doesn't mean they like to be told what to do in the moment, because they're a 1F type. 1F types don't want to be told what to do in the physical world. But to be told about their future or their goals or where they're headed or life advice, they will listen to that, as long as it doesn't cross over into the physical realm. It's more about just reaching a goal or your personal power or something like that, right? Okay, so that closes off our Pente types. I'm trying to keep this under 2 hours, so let's get into LVEFs. Again, they can be confused with, go back and listen to FLEV if you want to hear that, but this is our theorist, is what I used to call them, but I changed it to the deviser because they're more like devising out action plans that they can take for the future. This type can be highly competitive, just like VLFE and VLEF, but the way in which they do it is very cerebral. They're ideas people. They're constantly thinking about ideas. They're constantly maneuvering through like just brand new creative thoughts about how life works and their lifestyle. And they also can try to be the best. Like a lot of 3s fall into this category. Find the best thing, find the best idea and then go with it and figure out why it matters to them in life. And ultimately what they're trying to do is find the truth. Now, they want the truth. They understand that the truth is vast, and this separates them from from LVFEs, because LVFEs are more they're less emotionally inclined to care, where LVEFs, they understand the emotional experience is quite vast, and there's a lot of truths that in there that are not your conventional truths. So the way that these two types look at truth can help you differentiate them. So you might even want to ask them. LVFEs are more likely to give you like a hard truth, like this is how this thing works. Where LVEFs are like, well, yeah, this is how this thing works, but depending on this person involved or the relationship between these two people or the emotional atmosphere and all these other factors that might affect it, they understand that the truth is very, very vast. So that's a good, and this can also make them look not 1L, so they can misidentify as any 2L type, any of them, and even ELVFs. The difference is LVFs usually aren't hateful. They're usually jolly people, happier, energetic, and then until they get triggered. So you will see LVEFs get triggered by some emotional response or feedback that they get, and then they shut down. So you'll see the shutdown and then reemerge, shutdown and reemerge, and they don't like to be dark. These people, they hate being stuck in dark thoughts and dark ideas and feeling alone. They don't know how to make an aesthetic or a mood out of it. They don't want to. They don't really care. They're more concerned with, like, connecting their action plan to other people and why it matters to their emotions. They can also look like LEVFs if they're not super attentive to their own emotions. They can think that they're more open about emotions than they are. But again, you got to point them back to the shutdown. When you see the shutdown happen from emotions, you know that's the 3E type, where the LEVFs don't really do that. So moving on to the LEVF types, this is your visionary. They usually understand that they're LEVFs. This is your 3V type that doesn't realize they're 3Vs. They think that since they're really good at academia and they can figure out anything and they know a lot of information and they usually know what's right and what's wrong, and they can, get straight A's and pass anything, and it's all a breeze. They confuse that for volition, so when they find the system, sometimes they think they're 1V, or they don't know where to put the 3V, or they think they just don't care about it, so they think it's 4V. They don't realize that they're actually 3V, and they get extremely stressed about their future, and that's what causes them to, batten down the hatches and figure it out. It's that 3V. So they can confuse themselves for LEFV as well, because they're also philosophical. But they're philosophical in a way that is trying to inform you of how to live a better life, right? Self-care, self-worth. They've got the E and the V in the middle there, which is our humanistic aspects, and they're in the processing positions. So the LEVF is like, how can we live a better life? I'm interested in self-help. And they have kind of like an angelic quality is what I like to call it, but it's like, I want to save you by changing your mind. So they'll monologue. They'll definitely monologue and think that they're correct. And then they want you to listen, and they want you to share your emotional experience, especially if you give them feedback on their logic, which is weird for a 1L type. Might make them confuse themselves for ELVF, but they're not as hateful. And when they are hateful, they try to reimagine it or override the hate with philosophy. Like, well, no, I'm just that way because whatever higher power thing that's happening here in this situation. It can become... They can start to justify their hatred, and it comes from 2E. When 2Es feel hate, they often try to justify it with other reasons. And that happens with all second attitudes, by the way. It's not just 2E. So that's the LEVF's main issue here. This type can also be super religious and have a lot of faith for things, and they want to believe in a higher power. They want to believe in things outside of their own body and out of their own mind. It's kind of that 4F spirituality coming in. They aren't too attached to their own attitude on physics. But they will listen to other people, and they take suggestions into consideration. Some of them can actually believe that they're FEVL because they've gotten so wrapped up in, usually they're 9s, they've gotten so wrapped up in just living a better life and focusing on those middle attitudes that they forget that they think that they're right by default. so 1Ls can kind of have that, especially if they're 1L4 subtype and they don't take it seriously until they have to. Yeah. Now, to poke them and figure out that they're 1L, just start insinuating that everything they're saying is wrong. And you'll see the 1L quickly come out. They'll either shut you down and ignore you or fight against you. It's not like FEVLs that are like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess you're right, dude. there is like an active contention, and how dare you, because I am right. But they can't be emotionally hateful about it, again, or they'll try to justify it when they are. So it kind of works in a loop, this type. They can also become politically active, very interested in politics, especially if they're like a 1 or a 6 or 4 or 7. If they have 147, 146 trifix, they can be that politically oriented type. Yeah, there's just a lot going on here with this type internally. They're not bolstered to reality as much as, their dual type FVEL, which is what we'll get into here in a second. And that's a good way to spot them. They're also the 3V type that just will not realize they're 3V. So if somebody is like, I'm 1L, 2E, 4F, but I don't know where my V position is and it doesn't feel like 3V, they are LEVF. They can't recognize it. There's something that happens in this stacking that creates some higher unawareness of their 3V. You have to really point it out to them. Eventually they do get it, a lot of them, but at first, actually it can be a couple weeks, months until they get it, but it's hard for them to see it. They might think they're VELF. Now the difference is that VELFs want what they want. They have a desired goal, they have a desired future in mind, and they want to get to it, and nobody else can stop them. And LEVF that's not the case. LEVF actually is interested in other people's ideas of the future, and they might subtly ask you to share and consider it. Even though they're insecure about it, they still want given options. They just don't want people to tell them, no, you have to pick this option for the future. That's where they get freaked out and reactive and questioning and suspicious, like a typical 3V, right? Okay, that's LEVF. Moving on to their dual type here, FVEL. This type is the rarest type, I will say, in my opinion, the rarest type of all AP types. I've come across the least amount of them. However, I've been blessed and lucky enough to have a best friend that is FVEL, and a couple people in the communities have been FVEL. So lovely to have them around because I've learned immense amounts of things about them. Now, it's a unique type. They pretty much never mistype. They understand that they're FVEL. They don't really look like any other type except for FVLE on occasion and sometimes VFEL. And I've already talked about them in previous, so rewind to those if you want to hear about it. But FVELs are the most able to survive anywhere, and this was written about in the original literature in Psychosophy. Afanasyev said that FVELs, you can throw them anywhere, like in the North Pole. In extreme conditions, dry, the desert, they will find a way to make it work. And I think that's a beautiful representation. This is also what I have found even in reconstructing the system entirely. It is true. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't freak out and have anxiety about it, because they do. This type has massive anxiety about where they should live, where they should go, what they should do, what's going on around them. They're just good at figuring it out. They have to. They believe that they must take control over it so that their emotions can calm down, so that they feel physically secure, even if they're not self-pres dominant in Enneagram. So this type is they live and let live. They know. They're also the 2V type that you might not realize is 2V, because their 3E can kind of infect their 2V. The 3E can make them afraid of emotional feedback, afraid of relating to other people, needing to be more shut off. So their 2V might not look as helpful and oriented around helping people open their options. They've got to be comfortable with you, usually. But once they're comfortable with you, they will be like, hey, you could do this, we could do that. There's options for your future, and how about we do this, and whatever. They're also great at playing real life Tetris. So the game Tetris with the blocks, where you try to make lines and fit them in beautiful positions that there's no empty space left over. This is the type that's good at that. So they're the 1F2V type that like can put anything together, and they're very assured in how they do it. Like, you just can't watch them. So when you watch them, they're afraid that you're judging them emotionally, and that you're gonna say something off kilter, and they're gonna have to like perceive your emotions, and they don't like that. So the 3E can kind of throw them off there. And then this is also the 4L type that is very open to other people's opinions, wants to know what people are thinking and what they believe is right. You might confuse them with FLEV, but there's just not a focus on past, present, future, and the occult and how everything relates to one another. This is your type that wants beauty, to be surrounded by an aesthetic that they enjoy, wants to make things their own, and if they can't, then they'll fantasize about it. So this is your type that will get lost in fantasy, especially the 9s. Yes, that's really all I can say. Sometimes they can be confused with FEVL, but not really. It's more like people that just don't know the system or haven't met anybody of that type. They don't see it. So that takes us to our final type. We're going to try to stay under 2 hours. Woo! FEVLs. This is our sensualist, right? This is what I used to call them, but now they're the impressionists. And this type is very common. So, sorry guys, those of you that want to be like rare, your type is not rare, I'm sorry. But it's weird just switching that 2V and the 3E creates the most common type compared to the rarest type. I don't know why that is. There's got to be some sort of explanation that I haven't found yet. But this type can be confused for FLVE, actually. This type can have kind of like the shut-off 2E, especially the masculine, male-identifying FEVLs. Sometimes they don't like to be... they don't like to overtly display their emotions. That you will see it in their style, but they aren't bugging people to emote back at them or to discuss relationships and gossip. They're more quiet about it, so they might think they're FLVE. But the difference is that FLVEs are like poking people, like, well, what do you think? Like, I want to hear your opinion. I want to hear the way that you logically think about the world. And then they take it into consideration and nod. Now, both types can be quiet. Both can be self-preservation 9s, very independent and wanting to do their own thing, very concerned about bodily autonomy. Again, for those of you who have heard, oh, you can't be FLVE and 9, you can't be 1F and 9, you can't be 3V and 9, you can't be 1V and 9. F and V in the first and third position, any of that can be Enneagram 9, because this is people that are concerned about autonomy. That's the core concern of the gut center, autonomy, right? So any of those possibilities, any of those combinations are possible, and I have seen all of them. 1V, 3V, 1F, and 3F. So with that aside, FEVLs are concerned about autonomy. Now, they are more... smooth about social interactions with others. They're more emotionally open. They're more emotionally permissive than FLVEs. FLVEs don't want to waste time talking about emotions and how they feel. They often don't know and don't care. And they would rather somebody else figure it out for them or just decide for them. Or they want to just quickly say it and then move on. FEVLs want to take time. They actually do like talking about people and figuring out what everybody thinks and believes and feels. And, it might not be apparent at first, but the closer you get to them, the more you see this warm part of them come out that is interested in human connection, human values, even just the attractiveness between people, what attracts people to one another. You will see that as well with the FEVLs. They can also be confused with FELVs, but again, the main difference here is that 3V is so obvious. It just comes out, and this is your volcano type, so they might be calm, cool, and collected on the surface, but if you start poking at them and pressuring them to do something in the future or to move towards a goal that they don't want to move towards, they'll blow up like a volcano, and it's scary. FELVs don't have that. FELVs are more like dramatic and a little bit more whiny with the 4V in there. It's not as explosive as a 3V. 3Vs, it's so insecure, and FEVLs will often eat their insecurities as well. So it comes out through the body, right? Like, I'm just going to eat and consume this visceral feeling that I have with this 3V, and the 1F has to take control over it. And that's where you can see that. And they can also become obsessed. They're like shopaholics. They can just buy everything in sight. And that's different than FELVs. FELVs they don't need that consumption as much. Like, they're still a 1F type, but the consumption is more about, I'm going to consume this new aesthetic that I want to build. And then when they're tired of that, they'll pick a new one. But a lot of them will stick with the same aesthetic for a long time and just make little bitty changes. Or FEVLs, it's like constant consumption of things, materials, stuff, needs, etc. Okay, that was every single type, exactly 2 hours. Thank you all that have made it to the end of this. Quick reminder, I am now doing video typings. Any of you that are introverted or don't want to meet with me one-on-one, maybe it's scary, maybe you have other reasons, maybe my times are terrible, which I know they are, you can now make a video. You can do it for I have questions for your core AP type. I have questions for your subtypes if you just want to do that. Make sure that you have been officially typed by me prior to it, because I don't want to get your subtype video and be like, hey, you're not this type that you think you are, so your subtypes are going to be different. You can purchase both, right, for a reduced price. That's all on the website under book coaching or typing services. Go ahead and click on one of those, fill it out. There's a Google document that you can click on to get to the questions that you need to answer. You can submit a video. Make sure you put it on YouTube as an unlisted video. The directions are all there. Just go follow them. And then I will get back to you within a week. For those of you who are wanting to be professionally typed, I've got a lot of emails about that. I'm so sorry I've taken this long to get to this point. It just dawned on me the other day. And for those of you who do want to meet face-to-face, I'm still doing booking online. Those have been going great recently, so keep them coming. Love all the questions. And the videos will resume on each specific type in depth of the functions. So thank you for listening to this, and have a wonderful rest of your day, those who are listening. Bye-bye.